everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Jacob. Today, we got a good episode, which I know I say that about in every episode, but I think all episodes are good episodes. On this week, we're talking trauma, abuse, and probably so much more. But before we get to our guest this week, I want to do a few podcast plugs. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/conversations with Jacob on YT. That stands for YouTube. And we're on Twitter at CWJ Podcast. And that's all our social media platforms as right now. Which our podcasting platforms involved TuneIn, and we're on Spotify, we're on iHeart, Pandora, and we're all over the place, the UK, France, some of the United States, and we're mostly listened to, and right here in Virginia, mostly Martinsville, Virginia, because that's where this podcast is based on. If you got a guest suggestion, questions, or anything like that, you could you can send to our mailbag, conversationswithjacob@gmail.com, and you can check out our website as well, conversationswithjacobpodcast.weebly.com. You can find upcoming guests, past guests, and so much more. And also a big thanks to Jake Thorne for the podcast intro. I can't thank him enough. The podcast intro is only on the audio version. Jake Thorne's a good friend of mine. He's a John Wayne performer. And thanks for the intro, Jake. So joining me this week, her name is Shirley Buck, and we're going to talk about transforming trauma. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, for the people that's listening and watching, can you give us like a background about who you are?
Yes, I am currently a mindset coach specializing in trauma and abuse recovery. I myself have been through years of severe abuse and trauma, and I transformed my life not by traditional therapy or meds, but by changing my mindset and learning tools over 30 years of studying, changing my mindset, and now live a very happy, productive life.
All right. Now you went through trauma and abuse. Can you tell us your story?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
I was born to deaf parents, and that in itself brings challenges because you become their ears and their voice at a very young age. An example of that is I interpreted their divorce at the age of 5 years old. And my mother met someone around when I was about 8 years old and married him, and he talked my mom into selling our home that my father had left us and moved us into a very small, horrible apartment and took all our money and left, but not before molesting me. And that was my first experience with trauma and abuse. My mother, very shortly after he left, became an abusive alcoholic, and she would beat me quite often. She'd be gone for days as well, from the age of like 8 to 13. And her being deaf, she had come home raped once, where I've had to go to the hospital with her and interpret the process, everything that happened to her. She also, at one time, had to get an abortion, and I had to go interpret that at like 12 years old. She would come home drunk and very angry, I think, resenting having me. She would say, "I wish I never had you. I just had you to save our marriage, and it didn't work." And but she would hit me until I would form this like lock jaw, and start shaking, and my jaw would lock up, and she'd then get scared and take me to the hospital. And unfortunately, back then, they didn't do much about child abuse. They would wrap me in hot blankets, and as soon as I calmed down, they'd send me back home with her. So at the age of 13, my mother had committed suicide. She had stabbed herself repeatedly in the stomach and throat, and she tried to take my life that night as well. If it hadn't been for the neighbors that lived in the basement breaking in, I probably wouldn't be here today. So that in itself was a lot of trauma and abuse to overcome. But at the age of 13, I moved in with my father, who was remarried, and my stepmother wouldn't let me eat there or wash my clothes there. She would set a plate of food down, my father would set a plate of food in front of me, and my stepmother would take it and throw it in the sink and go lock herself in the bedroom, and he'd go chasing after her and trying to talk to her. And after a while, I just told my dad, don't worry about it. I just started hanging out with friends late at night. My sister would actually, I had a half sister that my father and my stepmother had together years before they were even married. And she would leave the bedroom window unlocked for me to come home. And I started working at 13 for a local grocery store. A man owned it and hired me for 8 hours a day, and he'd give me $10 a day. So I'd go there every day after school. He'd give me $10 a day, and I would eat out on that $10, and I would save my change and do laundry at the end of the week. And he began to molest me. So he molested me for 2 years. Unfortunately, the same man who was hurting me was really my only adult friend at the same time. So aside for those 15 minutes that he'd take me in the back, he was actually kind to me, and I guess was a means of me surviving. At 15, I had met someone who was 25 years old, and he told me he loved me, he was going to take care of me and take me away from all this craziness I was going through. And of course, I believed him. I was young, and he told me that he was sterile, he couldn't have children, and I ended up pregnant. And of course, he left once I was pregnant, and I had to give my son up for adoption. So after I'd given my son up for adoption, I was just living pretty much wild at friends' houses and cars. I was partying. I developed addictions. I had eating disorders. I was everywhere from 70 pounds to 200 pounds on the scale throughout my life. So, I mean, there's an example of what my childhood was and the trauma and abuse that has happened.
So, and how did you overcome the trauma and the abuse?
Well, overcoming it was quite a while after that. I had gotten a job through my cousin at Sloan Bell, where I was making a lot of money. I was working for the Steelworkers Union. I became a machinist there. I had gotten my own apartment, my own car, and I was partying. I was just like acting like everything was fine, everything was good. And when I met my children's father, I was about 23 years old. And he was a good guy. He was someone I could trust, someone I could, like the first genuine good guy I've ever dated. And we moved in together, and I had a nervous breakdown. I just collapsed. And I think all the years of me just partying, going through it, not thinking about just trudging through it, just surviving basically. Once I felt safe and I knew someone could take care of everything, I just broke down, and it was the most terrifying time of my life. I really thought I was going to lose my mind. I didn't think I would ever be okay. I didn't want to go to traditional therapists. Not that I'm saying that it's wrong for people to do that. I myself had seen other people go through therapy, and I felt like they were talking to people who learned things out of a textbook. Like, how could anybody ever know what I've been through and really tell me how to heal when they've probably never, experienced things like that. And I didn't want to get on meds because I was starting to not drink and get off drugs, and I just didn't want to go that route. So the first book that I had, after collapsing and staying in bed for months and not going to work, not doing anything, I just quit life, really. And my husband at the time, he really stood by my side and encouraged me, and And I decided I wanted to be okay. I decided I wanted to be a parent one day, and I didn't want to be my mother. So the first book I got my hands on, it was called, I think, the Feel Good Handbook. And I started doing the work and started learning about why I would be feeling the way I feel, why I was going through what I was going through. And I learned about alcoholism and what my mother was going through. And I started learning so much. And then I just started devouring book after book, and which led me into meditation and energy work and changing my mindset. And that's a process that's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple process, but it's not easy to do, if that makes sense. You know, especially when you're struggling. So I had I learned how to train my mind and how to think. And I think one of the first exercises I did is I went back to that little girl and witnessed what she was going through as my mother was hitting her, and which was me. And I just, hugged her and told her, look, I love you, and you're going to be okay. You're strong. I can't believe how much you do. And, and I just encouraged her and loved her. And then I thought, that is me. Why don't I love me? Why? And that was the first process. That was the first step of self-love, which you need self-love, and you need to change your mind process. Another thing that I realized is the past really doesn't exist. Sorry about that. The past really doesn't exist unless you give it thought. And that's pretty mind-blowing because, it doesn't exist unless you give it thought. So why do we choose to give bad thoughts power over us when they're no longer there to hurt us? And so that was the beginning steps of changing my mindset. And once I got really good at that, I started learning things about creating the life I desire, manifestations, and the laws of attraction. And it just kept snowballing into more and more wonderful things.
Now, when you was going through all of this, did you have like nightmares or like triggers?
Yes. Oh, yes. I had terrible nightmares, terrible fears. I'm still very, very aware of my surroundings. I'm not fearful when I go out, but I feel that I probably was a victim for so long that I'm always aware of my surroundings. There's things that, I still do. But yes, I had tons of nightmares. And I don't have nightmares anymore, which is wonderful.
Now, for people that's listening or watching, how can they overcome trauma and abuse?
Well, changing your mindset is the very first step. And I myself had created a 3-month course, and my course actually conditions your mind. There's weekly lessons with daily activities that help you change your mindset in the simplest form. And that in that 90 days, your mindset definitely resets and shifts. And then you can move on your own, or work with me to go on to, bigger steps of creating your own life in abundance and all these wonderful things that come from changing your mindset. Again, it sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's not easy. Taking ownership is real important. It's very powerful to take ownership and say, this is happening to me. Because I'm letting it. I'm not taking control. No one can treat me bad as an adult. As a child, it's different unless I allow it, and so taking ownership is probably the first step. And I go through self-love, I go through not feeling guilty. I have lessons on that. I have lessons on being childlike. That should never change. Never, ever as an adult should we stop being childlike. and enjoying life. And that happens to a lot of us. We get caught up in the news and all these terrible things going on that we forget to enjoy the simple things.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned a 90-day course, and how can people get involved with that?
Well, you can go onto my site, shirleybuck.com. The business name is Red Leaf Alternative Healing. But if you punch in shirleybuck.com, it'll take you right to my website. And I also have a book being released. It's my life story and some of the lessons I've learned and the tools I've used. That's being released September 19th, and that's going to be called Sweet Freedom Whispered in My Ear.
All right, yeah. As a matter of fact, and that's going to be my next question about your book. By the way, that book, what you said, September 19th, and this episode goes up on August 21st, so it's not a long time from now from when this episode goes up. And so your book is about what?
It is my life story. Obviously, a lot more has happened in my life. I can't spit it all out in 5 minutes. Yeah. All the years that. So it goes into it goes into detail on everything that I've been through and tools that I have used and lessons I've learned from each of the time frames that I go through. Each chapter, at the end of each chapter, talks about what I've learned from that particular era and what tools I use to survive. And there, you can also get on an email list on my website to be notified for the book when that does get.
And where can the people buy the book when it comes out?
It'll be on Amazon. It'll also be online at Barnes and Noble.
All right, there you go. I was also, when you was going through this trauma and abuse, and did you also go through depression?
Oh yeah, I had depression, anxiety. I had a lot of, I guess what they would call nowadays OCD, where I had to flick a light a certain amount of times, or I had to, if I said a word, I had to keep saying it until I said it right, enunciated it just right. If I turned in a circle to pick something up, I couldn't turn around. I had to turn back the other way. So yeah, I had a lot of, and like I said, I went through addictions and eating disorders. Yeah, I didn't just magically, become okay. In the first steps of changing my mindset, it took me learning how to change my mindset, and then it took discipline to keep that up. And that's one of the things, when you get my course, you have that course for the rest of your life. You can always go back to it, go back to the basics, which I do from time to time. And, if I'm feeling a little funky or something, I get back down, to the basics and, practice and stay disciplined on it.
Now, can you tell us a little about the energy healing, and what that is?
Well, I'm actually a Reiki master as well. I started receiving energy work before I even understood it. I was about maybe 28, 29 years old. And whenever I would receive energy work, my hands would burn really bad, and I would see purple images, and they would, the lady doing the energy work on me would say, you need to be doing energy work. You have that in you. And, and then I started being trained on that. But energy work, it actually shifts your energy and it helps you release negative energy, which when you go through trauma and abuse, you have these, blockages, and energy healing helps you release those blockages. It also helps you relax enough so that your body can heal. When I first started doing Reiki, I was scared because I knew that it worked on me, but I was like, how do I explain this? How do I do this? And I've been practicing Reiki now for about 12 years, and I have some really profound experiences with my clients, and it's really a wonderful thing.
Is there some people who kind of doubt that?
Yes, I I even had one client who before she even met her husband, I was always working with him for the past, I think I was working with him for about 3 years before he met her. And she kept saying, he wants me to have Reiki. He wants me to have Reiki, but no offense. I just want a massage. I don't believe in that. And I'm like, that's no problem. I don't take any offense to it. And finally, one day she said, I can't take him nagging me. I'm just going to do it. It's probably not going to work because I doubt it so much. And believe it or not, she was the most profound experience we had. And she still is getting Reiki from me to this day. So it's, yeah, people do doubt it.
Absolutely.
But I'd say try it.
Oh, yeah. And where can people find you on social media?
I have a LinkedIn. I do have a private Facebook community group with my business, but I do have a business page, Red Leaf Alternative Healing on Facebook. But my private community group is now built up to like 650 people, and I blog on there every so often, and probably once a week I blog on there, and I post things, and I have people post their small wins and things like that. It's a pretty nice community on, and that's just Red Leaf Healing. So if you're looking for the group, you can look for Red Leaf Healing and then ask to join the group.
All right. Now, for people that's going through trauma and abuse, maybe it happens at home, like for the younger people that goes through trauma and abuse, is it the right thing for them to bring it up at like to friends or maybe at school?
Yes. Definitely if you're younger, talk to somebody and get help, get out of the situation. It's okay to get out of the situation. A lot of times we don't have the self-confidence. We're ashamed to tell people what's going on. Don't be ashamed. It's not your fault. Please, please talk to somebody and get out of it. And it's very important that you do it. It's not your fault, and you don't deserve to be going through it.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've reached the end of this episode, but before we go, and do you got any closing thoughts?
I guess my closing thoughts are, you're not alone. Even if you've been through years of therapy and you feel like you cannot shake it, you can't get over it, you absolutely can. I live a very happy life. I love my children. My children are adults. I even have grandchildren now. I live a wonderful, beautiful life. I do not let the pain of my past, hurt me anymore. In fact, it's empowered me and it's inspired me to help other people. But please don't feel that it's hopeless. It's not. You just have to learn to shift your mindset and stay dedicated to that.
Absolutely. I think that's the best closing thoughts I've heard in 24 episodes.
Thank you so much.
Of course. But anyways, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about your story, which I really enjoyed it. I'm sure my listeners has too.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah, of course. My pleasure. All right. That would do it for Conversations with Jacob. Tune in next week as we talk true crime and stories. And we went from trauma to abuse to crime. That never happens. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Check back next week, and that'll be the final episode of August. So until then, God bless. We'll catch you in the next one.